In a city where power wears silk and smiles, the most dangerous person in the room is the one you tip 20% and forget. The glass koi wasn't a restaurant. It was a cathedral of concealment wrapped in lacquer and light. Politicians practiced their off-the-record voices over bluefin that cost more than rent. Billionaires upgraded sin to an aesthetic behind walls of hand-blown crystal and privacy clauses, and men like Seung-hyun Kwon came to pretend the violence that built their empire had been buried beneath bottle service and Michelin stars. The VIP alcove pearlescent lacquer, koi swimming through glass underfoot, was a throne room without a crown, where power didn't need to announce itself because the architecture already knew who mattered. Seung-hyun Kwon sat as if the building itself was wearing him. Cufflinks that could ransom a neighborhood caught the amber glow of pendant lights imported from Kyoto. His jaw looked like a verdict carved from stone, and decades of saying no, without ever raising his voice. To the world scrolling past his name on Forbes, he was the visionary who'd transformed street violence into a global hospitality empire, the architect who'd replaced brass knuckles with five-star service. To those who still whispered his real name in Koreatown backrooms, he was the White Wolf of Bucheon, still the man who'd walked out of gang wars with blood under his nails and a reputation for never losing. Tonight, beneath soft jazz and the murmur of deal-making, he was trying to believe in civilization, trying to pretend the wolf had finally been domesticated. Nyla Carter moved like water through concrete. She didn't smile the way the other servers did, bright, transactional, engineered to earn a tip and evaporate from memory. Her face carried the kind of stillness that only came from people who'd survived the dark and learned to keep it leashed. Her hands, elegant and steady as a surgeon's, navigated trays and glassware with a precision that felt military, not hospitality. Kwon noticed. He told himself he shouldn't have, but there was something in the way she mapped the room, not with a server's choreographed efficiency, but with a soldier's paranoia. Her eyes didn't follow orders. They tracked exits, calculated sightlines, registered faces twice. Her posture didn't suggest deference. It whispered coiled readiness, the kind of body memory that runs equations for violence no one else believes exists. Except tonight it did. At 9:16 p.m., 3 men stepped in from the valet entrance like they belonged. They moved with the easy confidence of sommeliers arriving late, except they carried no wine. The first wrong note was glassware. One held a champagne flute by the bowl, not the stem. The second was footwear. Tactical boots spray-painted black to pass as dress shoes, but built to run, to pivot, to kill. Nyla's hand stilled mid-pour. Her pulse didn't spike. It steadied. Muscle memory older than her current name took over. Kwon saw it too, the way the lead man scanned not for a table, but for vectors. The way his jacket hung heavy on the left side. Then the world detonated. The first gunshot didn't crack the air, it shattered it, turning the glass koi from a temple of wealth into a kill box in less than a heartbeat. A crystal chandelier exploded into 1,000 falling stars. Screams erupted. Tables overturned. Panic moved like a living thing, swallowing reason whole. But 2 people in that room didn't scream. Nyla's tray hit the floor. Her body dropped into a crouch. Center of gravity low. Knees bent. Weight distributed for movement. The sharp bite of cordite flooded her senses, achingly familiar, almost nostalgic, and every instinct she'd buried under a fake name and quiet shifts came roaring back to life. Kwon's chair didn't tip. It simply ceased to matter. He was already moving, suit jacket flaring like a predator's mane, and the man who Forbes called a visionary became something older, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. The first assassin closed on Kwon with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. His mistake was believing the myths had dulled the man. Kwon's hand shot out faster than someone in Brioni should move, fingers locking around the shooter's wrist with surgical precision. A twist. A wet crack of bone breaking. The gun clattered across coilet glass like a prayer unanswered. Kwon drove his knee into the man's solar plexus, stole the air from his lungs, then brought his elbow down on the bridge of his nose with the kind of controlled brutality that only comes from ending lives, not just threatening them. Blood sprayed across hand-scraped walnut. The assassin dropped. This wasn't a businessman defending himself. This was the White Wolf of Bucheon, and he had never actually stopped hunting. The second and third assassins split, flanking him from opposite sides, professional, patient, weapons raised for clean center-mass shots. That's when Nyla moved. She grabbed her sterling silver tray, museum weight, 15 pounds of polished metal, and hurled it like a discus. It spun through ambient chaos and caught the left shooter across the temple with a sound like a bat hitting a watermelon. He staggered, gun dipping. She didn't wait to see him fall. She was already in motion, closing the distance with the kind of fluid, economical grace that only comes from training so deep it rewrites your nervous system. She snatched a wine bottle from a tilted table. Chateauneuf du Pape, 1998. Someone's anniversary and didn't throw it. She weaponized it. One sharp crack against the marble bar edge, and she drove the jagged glass into the third assassin's gun hand. Tendons parted. He screamed. The weapon clattered. She swept his legs with a low kick that had no wasted motion, and he crashed into a $6,000 light fixture that exploded like applause. Kwon spun, eyes locking with hers for half a breath. No words, no plan, just recognition to apex. Predators who'd never met but spoke the same mother tongue. The second shooter recovered, pivoting to reacquire his target. Kwon moved left, Nyla moved right, synchronized, instinctive. Kwon's cufflinks became improvised brass knuckles. He drove them into pressure points with the accuracy of someone who knew exactly how many pounds of force collapsed a trachea. Nyla used momentum and a sommelier's corkscrew she'd palmed from her apron to disable the man's dominant arm in 3 efficient motions. Wrist lock, joint hyperextension, nerve strike. By 9:18 p.m., 3 would-be killers lay broken among coilet glass and overturned burgundy. The dining room fell silent, except for ragged breathing and the distant wail of sirens crawling through Los Angeles traffic. Somewhere, a woman sobbed. Somewhere else, a man whispered prayers in Mandarin. But in the center of the wreckage, 2 people stood utterly still, staring at each other across a gulf of shattered crystal and spent adrenaline. Kwon straightened his cuffs. Blood not his dotted the white fabric. His voice came out calm, almost conversational. "You're not a waitress." Nyla wiped her knuckles on a linen napkin, her breathing controlled, deliberate. "And you're not retired." Outside, Los Angeles kept pretending it was safe. Inside the glass koi, 2 people who'd buried their pasts under false names and quiet nights had just remembered exactly who they used to be, and neither of them was naive enough to believe this was over. Kwon's eyes never left hers. "Whoever sent them will send more." "I know." Nyla's jaw set. "Which is why I'm leaving. Tonight. You won't make it to the door." His tone wasn't a threat. It was arithmetic. "They'll have watchers. Backup. Exit protocols." He tilted his head slightly, reading her the way a grandmaster reads a board. "You moved like someone with training. The kind governments don't admit to." She didn't confirm, didn't deny, just held his gaze with the kind of silence that was its own confession. Kwon exhaled slowly, something shifting behind his eyes' calculation, giving way to a decision he didn't want to make but couldn't avoid. "I need to know who sent them. You need to disappear without a bullet in your spine." He extended his hand, and it felt less like an offer and more like the last exit before the bridge collapses. "Help me find the face behind this. I'll make sure you vanish so completely even ghosts won't remember your name." Nyla stared at his hand. Every instinct she'd honed screamed the same word: run. But logic, cold and merciless, whispered something else. "You're already dead if you try this alone." The sirens were 3 blocks away now. 2. 1. She took his hand, and somewhere in the city, in a penthouse with a view of the ocean and a heart full of old vengeance, the person who'd ordered the hit watched the news alerts bloom across their phone and smiled. Because failed assassinations don't end wars, they start them. The lawyers arrived, before the bodies were cold. Kwon's machine moved with the kind of efficiency that only comes from practiced crisis management teams in charcoal suits, publicists with pre-written statements, and a legal defense so airtight it could survive a Senate hearing. By midnight, the narrative had been scrubbed, polished, and fed to every news outlet in Los Angeles. Self-defense. Tragic. Heroic staff. No charges pending. Nyla watched it happen from the back of Kwon's armored SUV, her reflection ghost-pale in bulletproof glass. Her hands had stopped shaking an hour ago. That was the problem. They'd stopped too quickly, settled too easily back into the stillness of someone who'd done this before. She flexed her fingers, felt the familiar ache of old training rising through new bruises, and hated how much it felt like coming home. "You're good at this," she said quietly, eyes still on the window as downtown blurred past. "Making blood disappear." Kwon sat across from her, tie loosened, cufflinks, gone, pocketed as evidence he'd never have to surrender. "I've had practice." His voice carried no pride, just fact. The world prefers its monsters and metaphors. As long as the bodies are cleaned up and the story makes sense, people will believe anything. "Is that what you are?" Nyla turned to face him. "A monster and a metaphor?" His eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw past the Forbes profile, past the white wolf myth, to something older and more tired than she'd expected. I'm a man who learned that survival requires teeth. What are you? She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because the truth was buried under 3 fake identities, 2 continents, and a program that officially didn't exist. The SUV pulled into an underground garage, private, surveillance scrubbed, the kind of space where secrets went to breathe. Kwon's penthouse occupied the top 4 floors of a building that didn't advertise its residents. The elevator required a fingerprint, a key card, and a 6-digit code that changed every 72 hours. You'll stay here tonight, Kwon said as the doors opened into a foyer that cost more than most people's houses. Marble, steel, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that looked almost innocent from this height. My security team will sweep for tracking devices. If they tagged you, they didn't. Nyla stepped out, instinctively mapping exits, camera angles, defensive positions. I checked. Twice. Kwon's eyebrow lifted a fraction. You checked. In the 30 seconds between the shooting and the police arriving, old habits. She turned, and her voice carried an edge sharp enough to draw blood. You offered me protection. I didn't ask for interrogation. Protection requires information. He moved past her into the main living space, minimalist, expensive, and utterly impersonal. No photos. No art that meant anything. Just the aesthetic of a man who'd learned not to leave evidence of caring. 3 trained operatives don't hit a public restaurant unless they're certain of the kill. Someone gave them my schedule, my location, my security gaps. His jaw tightened. Someone close. Nyla watched him pour 2 glasses of whiskey, Japanese, older than some marriages, and recognized the control in every movement. He was furious. He just refused to let it show. You have a suspect, she said. Not a question. Leo Vargas, my dockmaster. Kwon handed her a glass. He has family ties to the Sinaloa pipeline. Cousin married into a cartel-adjacent logistics network. 3 weeks ago, I rejected a partnership proposal that would have moved their product through my supply chain. He took a slow sip, eyes distant. 2 days later, someone starts asking questions about my routines. Yesterday, Leo called in sick for the first time in 4 years. Tonight, 3 shooters knew exactly when I'd be alone. Too neat. Nyla set the glass down untouched. If he's your leak, he's either stupid or a decoy. Explain. Real moles don't leave. Breadcrumbs. They don't call in sick the day before a hit. They don't have obvious motives you can Google. She moved to the window, staring out at the city's electric sprawl. Someone wants you looking at Leo, which means the real leak is someone you'd never suspect. Someone close enough to hear you breathe. Kwon was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped into something colder, more dangerous. You think like an operative. I think like someone who's survived people smarter than your dockmaster. Who trained you? Nyla's reflection stared back at her from the glass, a stranger wearing her face. A ghost she'd tried to bury under aprons and tip jars, and a life so small it couldn't cast a shadow. People who don't exist. For a program that was never funded. To do work that never happened. She turned, and her eyes were hollow. I was good at it. Good enough that when I walked away, they let me go because killing me would have cost more than I was worth. That's the only reason I'm still breathing. And now you're a waitress. I was a waitress. The correction came out bitter. Until you and your war dragged me back into a world I spent 3 years trying to forget. Kwon studied her the way a jeweler studies a diamond, looking for flaws, for fractures, for the truth hidden in the cut. I didn't drag you anywhere. You moved before the first shot finished echoing. You didn't think. You didn't hesitate. You reacted. He stepped closer, and his voice dropped to something almost gentle. Whatever you're running from, it's still inside you. Tonight just reminded you it never left. Nyla wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, but her hands, steady, surgical, still smelling faintly of cordite, told a different story. Before she could respond, Kwon's phone buzzed. Once, twice. Then it started ringing with the kind of insistence that meant the world was on fire. He answered, listened, and his face went to stone. When? A pause. How? Many? Another pause. Longer this time, and when he spoke again, his voice could have cut glass. I'm on my way. He ended the call and looked at Nyla with eyes that had gone from calculating to murderous. The glass koi is burning. Started 20 minutes ago. Accelerant-based, multiple points of origin. Professional. His hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. 3 of my staff were inside doing inventory. They didn't make it out. Nyla's stomach dropped. Faces flashed through her mind: Maria, who always hummed while she polished silverware. David, who was saving for his daughter's quinceañera. Sophie, who'd just gotten accepted to nursing school. There's more, Kwon continued, his voice barely controlled. The fire department found a message spray-painted on the adjacent building. It says, "Even white wolves bleed." The room felt smaller suddenly, colder. Nyla's training kicked in, running scenarios, calculating escalation patterns, and every answer came back the same. This isn't business. This is personal. Whoever sent those shooters isn't trying to kill you quietly, she said. They're trying to break you first. Make you watch everything you built turn to ash. Make you feel it. Kwon's jaw worked. She could see the war happening behind his eyes, the civilized man who'd spent a decade building legitimacy, versus the white wolf who'd survived by being more ruthless than everyone else. "I'm going to find them," he said quietly, and the calm in his voice was more terrifying than any threat. "And I'm going to salt the earth they walk on until nothing grows there again." "No," Nyla stepped between him and the door. "That's exactly what they want. They're baiting you into a war you'll win, by becoming the monster every headline already thinks you are. You'll destroy them, and in the process, you'll destroy everything you've spent 10 years building. Then what do you suggest?" His eyes were ice. "I let them burn my life down and smile for the cameras? I suggest we be smarter than they expect." She held his gaze. "You want the face behind this? Fine, but we do it with precision, not rage. We find the leak. We trace the money. We dismantle them piece by piece, until there's nothing left but evidence and handcuffs." Her voice hardened. "You don't win by becoming them. You win by being better." Kwon stared at her for a long moment, and she watched the calculation happen in real time, fury versus strategy, instinct versus intelligence. Finally, he exhaled. "You're asking me to trust you. A woman whose real name I don't even know." "No," Nyla corrected. "I'm asking you to trust that I know how to hunt ghosts, because I used to be one." The silence stretched between them, heavy with smoke and unspoken histories. Then Kwon's phone buzzed again. A text this time. He glanced at it, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, giving way to grim confirmation. He turned the screen toward her. A photo. Leo Vargas, zip-tied, to a chair in what looked like a shipping container, face bruised, eyes wide with terror. Below it, a single line of text. "Ask him who's really listening." Nyla's blood went cold. "It's not Leo. He's another message. Another piece of theater." "Then who?" Kwon's voice was barely a whisper. She looked at him, at the penthouse that suddenly felt less like a fortress and more like a cage, and spoke the truth they both already knew. "Someone who's been inside your walls the whole time. Someone you trust enough to never question. Someone who knows you well enough to predict every move you'll make." She paused. "Someone who's probably listening right now." Kwon's eyes went to the walls, the vents, the elegant minimalism that suddenly looked like 1,000 hiding places. And somewhere in the city, in a room full of screens and patient vengeance, someone smiled and pressed record. The dock smelled like salt, diesel, and the kind of money that didn't ask questions. Kwon's intelligence had been surgical. Lucio Andrade's crew was moving a weapons shipment through Terminal 7 at 2 a.m. Crates marked as industrial equipment, manifests scrubbed clean, but the payload was military-grade hardware destined for 3 different cartels. Intercept it, trace the buyers, and they'd have leverage, proof. A thread to pull until the whole operation unraveled. "This feels wrong," Nyla murmured from the passenger seat of the blacked-out SUV. They were parked 200 yards out, engine off, watching the dock through night vision optics. Kwon had brought 6 men handpicked, loyal, professionals who'd been with him since the Bucheon days. "Wrong how?" Kwon's voice was calm, but his hand rested near the Glock in his shoulder holster. "Too easy. Leo's photo was sent 4 hours ago. Now we have perfect intel on a shipment happening tonight?" She lowered the optics. "We're not hunting. We're being herded." Kwon's jaw tightened. "If we don't move, we lose the only lead we have. If we move, we might lose more than that." He looked at her, and for a moment she saw the weight of it, the impossible math of leadership, where every choice costs something and inaction is just another way to bleed. "Then we move smart. Fast in, fast out. No heroes." They moved like shadows through shipping containers stacked 3 high, the crew spreading in a tactical wedge. Nyla's leg throbbed the old bullet wound from Caracas that never quite healed right, but her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. Muscle memory older than her current name took over. The container was exactly where the intel said it would be. Kwon's demo man worked the lock in under 30 seconds. The doors swung open. Empty. Not just empty, staged. A single LED lantern illuminated the space, and zip-tied to a support beam, gagged and barely conscious, was Leo Vargas. It's a kill box, Nyla said, already turning. Move. Now. The first shots came from the container roof's high ground, overlapping. Fields of fire, professional positioning. Kwon's men returned fire, but the math was already done. Muzzle flashes lit the dark like a nightmare constellation. Nyla grabbed Kwon and pulled him behind a container as rounds punched through sheet metal like paper. How many? At least 12. Maybe more. His voice was ice over fury. They knew we were coming. They knew our route, our timing, our... A scream cut him off. One of Kwon's men went down, then another. The ambush was surgical, efficient, and utterly without mercy. We can't fight this, Nyla hissed. We run or we die. Kwon's eyes went to his men, the ones still breathing, still fighting, still dying for him. She saw the calculation, the guilt, the rage. Now Kwon. They ran. Bullets chased them through the container maze, sparking off steel, whining past their heads. Nyla's legs screamed with every step, but she pushed through it, dragging Kwon when he hesitated, forcing him forward when loyalty tried to pull him back. They made it to the SUV. Kwon floored it, tires shrieking, and the docks erupted behind them in a symphony of gunfire and death. 4 blocks away, Nyla finally exhaled. How many did we lose? Kwon's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. All of them. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. Kwon's penthouse felt like a mausoleum. Nyla collapsed onto the leather sofa, adrenaline finally crashing. And that's when she felt it, the hot, wet bloom spreading down her thigh. She looked down. Blood. Too much of it. You're hit. Kwon was beside her in an instant, hands already moving with the kind of calm that only comes from practice. Through and through. Missed the artery. Her voice was tight with pain. I've had worse. That's not reassuring. He grabbed a first aid kit from a hidden panel. His movements efficient, almost clinical. Hospital? No hospitals. No records. No questions. She gritted her teeth as he cut away the foam. Fabric. You've done this before. More times than I care to count. He poured antiseptic, and she hissed through clenched teeth. This is going to hurt. It already hurts. He worked in silence, cleaning, probing, extracting the bullet with forceps that looked surgical. His hands didn't shake, not once. When he finally pulled the round free and dropped it into a metal dish with a wet clink, Nyla let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. You're good at this, she said, watching him suture with the precision of someone who'd closed wounds in the dark, under fire, with lives hanging in the balance. I told you, I've had practice. He tied off the last stitch and met her eyes. 6 men died tonight because I walked into a trap. 6 men died because someone close to you is feeding your enemies everything they need to kill you. She grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. This isn't on you. This is on whoever's been whispering in the dark. Kwon's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went from stone to something colder. What? He turned the screen toward her. A news alert. The Glass Koi beloved LA landmark destroyed in suspected arson. 3 dead. Below it, a text from an unknown number. You should have stayed in your lane, White Wolf. Now watch everything burn. Nyla stared at the message, her mind racing through scenarios, probabilities, patterns. They're not just trying to kill you, they're dismantling you. Your business, your reputation, your people. They want you broken before they put you down. Then they're going to be disappointed. Kwon's voice was quiet, lethal. Because I don't break. Everyone breaks. Nyla shifted, wincing as pain lanced through her leg. The question is whether you break forward or backward, whether you become the monster they expect or something they can't predict. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the question forming before he asked it. Why are you still here? You could have run, disappeared. You don't owe me anything. She didn't have a good answer. Or maybe she did, and it scared her too much to say it out loud. So instead, she said, because whoever set that trap knows how to kill people like us, and I'd rather face them with you than alone. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. Kwon nodded slowly, then stood and walked to the window. The city sprawled below, indifferent and infinite. Leo wasn't the leak, he was bait, which means the real mole is still inside my circle, still listening, still feeding them everything. Then we stop talking, Nyla said, and we start hunting. Kwon turned, and in the amber light of the penthouse, he looked less like a businessman and more like the wolf his enemies still whispered about. You said you used to be a ghost. Can you teach me how to hunt one? Nyla smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had no warmth in it. Only teeth. That's the only thing I'm still good at. Outside, the city kept frenning, pretending it was safe. Inside, two predators began planning a war that would be fought in silence, in shadows, and in the spaces between trust and betrayal. And somewhere closer than either of them knew, someone listened to every word and smiled. The bug was smaller than a shirt button. Nyla found it behind the Rothko print in Kwon's study, a near-field skimmer with a 3-block range, military grade, the kind of hardware that didn't show up on civilian sweeps. She held it between her fingers like a venomous insect and felt her blood turn to ice. How long? Kwon's voice was barely a whisper. Based on the battery? At least 3 weeks. She dropped it into a glass of water, killing the signal. Whoever planted this has heard everything, every plan, every conversation, every breath. Kwon's face went through a dozen emotions in the space of a heartbeat: shock, rage, betrayal, before settling into something colder and more dangerous than any of them. Find the others. They did. 7 more devices scattered throughout the penthouse like malignant seeds: bedroom, kitchen, even the panic room he'd built to be surveillance-proof. Each one a violation. Each one a knife in the back from someone he'd trusted. This level of access. Nyla lined up the bugs on the marble counter like evidence at a crime scene. This isn't a hired contractor. This is someone who knows your routines. Someone who has keys, codes, clearance to be alone in your space. My head of security swept this place 2 weeks ago. Then either he's incompetent or complicit. She met his eyes. Who else has unrestricted access? Kwon's jaw worked. My attorney, my accountant, He stopped, and something cracked behind his eyes. Hana. Who's Hana? Hana Cho. My director of public relations. She's been with me for 8 years. Since before I left Korea. His voice sounded hollow, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. She has keys. Codes. She's in and out of here 3 times a week for briefings, strategy sessions. He trailed off, staring at the bugs like they might rearrange themselves into a different truth. Nyla pulled out her phone and started running searches. Deep web, encrypted databases, the kind of places her old program had taught her to navigate. Hana Cho, 34, UCLA grad. No criminal record, no red flags. She scrolled deeper. Wait, she had a younger brother, Daniel Cho. Died 5 years ago in Los Angeles. Cause of death listed as gang violence, but the case was closed without arrests. Kwon went very still. What date? March 15th, 2020? She watched the color drain from his face. You know something? March 2020 was the Koreatown consolidation. I was cleaning up territorial disputes, absorbing smaller operations into my network. There was resistance. People got hurt. His voice was flat, clinical. The way people talk about violence when they've done too much of it. I signed off on the sweep. I didn't pull triggers, but I gave the order. 37 people were hospitalized. 4 died. And one of them was Hana's brother. I didn't know. Kwon's hands curled into fists. I never made the connection. She never said, why would she? Nyla's voice was sharp. She wanted you close. Wanted to watch you build your empire, smile for cameras, pretend you'd left the violence behind. And the whole time, she was feeding your enemies everything they needed to tear it all down. She paused. This isn't about money. This is about making you suffer. Kwon's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his face went from stone to ash. What? He turned it toward her. A photo. A little girl, maybe 9 years old, unconscious in the back of a van. Below it a message. Rooftop of the Meridian Tower. Midnight. Come alone, White Wolf. Bring your past with you. Or we mail her back in pieces. Who is she? Nyla asked, though she already knew from the way Kwon's hands were shaking. My niece, Min Seo, my sister's daughter. His voice cracked. She was at a music lesson in Koreatown. She had security, protocols, a driver, and Hana knew all of it. Nyla grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to focus. This is the play. They take what you love, make you watch it bleed, and when you're broken enough, they kill you. It's textbook. Then what do I do? For the first time since she'd met him, Seung-hyun Kwon looked lost. She's 9 years old. If I don't go, if you go alone, you both die. Nyla was already moving, pulling up building schematics on her phone. The Meridian Tower, 42 stories. Under construction, right? Top 15 floors are unfinished. No power, no security. Which makes it perfect for an execution. She zoomed in on the structural plans. But it also means access points they can't cover, service elevators, exterior maintenance rigs. Her mind was racing, calculating angles, probabilities, the kind of math that only made sense when lives hung in the balance. You're going to that rooftop, but you're not going alone, and you're not going unarmed. They said they lied. She looked at him, and her eyes were hard as diamonds. They're going to kill her anyway. The only question is whether we let them do it on their terms or ours. Kwon stared at her for a long moment, and she watched the war happen behind his eyes. The uncle who wanted to surrender versus the wolf who knew surrender was just another word for death. What do you need? He finally asked. Climbing gear. Comms. A rifle I can zero in the next 3 hours. She pulled up a weather report. And pray the wind stays under 15 knots, because I'm going to have one shot at this, and if I miss, we both lose everything. At 11:47 p.m., Nyla hung from a steel beam 38 stories above Los Angeles, and every muscle in her body screamed. The climb had been brutal, exterior maintenance rig to scaffolding to exposed I-beams, all of it in the dark with a rifle strapped to her back and a leg that was still bleeding through her sutures. But she'd made it. She was in position, and through her scope, she could see the rooftop tableau like a stage set for tragedy. Min Seo, drugged and kneeling, zip-tied and terrified, 2 shooters flanking her, weapons trained on the stairwell access, and standing in the center like a conductor before an orchestra, Hana Cho. She looked different than her corporate headshots, harder, colder, like she'd finally stopped pretending to be anything other than what grief had made her. In her hand, a pistol. In her eyes, 5 years of patient vengeance finally coming due. At 11:58, Kwon stepped onto the rooftop, hands raised, alone. Hello, Hana, he said quietly. Hello, Seung-hyun. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. You have my niece. You had my brother. She smiled, and it was the saddest thing Nyla had ever seen. Do you even remember his name? Kwon's silence was answer enough. Daniel, Hana continued. Daniel Cho. He was 23. He played guitar. He wanted to be a teacher. And you killed him because he was in the wrong place when you decided to play king. I'm sorry. And Kwon meant it. Nyla could hear it even from 40 feet away. I'm sorry for your brother. I'm sorry for every person I hurt building this empire. But Min Seo is innocent. She's 9 years old. Please. My brother was innocent too. Hana raised the pistol, aiming it at Kwon's chest. But I'm not going to kill you. Not yet. First, you're going to watch her die. Then you're going to live with it. Just like I have. She turned the gun toward Min Seo, and Nyla made her choice. The wind shifted. Nyla felt it against her face, a crosswind gust that turned her perfect shot into a gamble. She had the angle. She had the training. But the wind was wrong. The distance was brutal. And if she missed, a 9-year-old girl died. So she didn't take the shot. She dropped the rifle, grabbed the climbing rope she'd pre-rigged, and jumped. 40 feet of free fall turned into a pendulum swing as the line snapped taut. She hit the rooftop at a dead sprint, momentum and gravity doing the math her muscles couldn't. Hana turned, eyes wide with shock, gun pivoting. Too slow. Nyla tackled her at the waist, all 130 pounds of controlled violence, and they went over the edge together. For one perfect, terrible moment, they hung in the air, 2 women bound by nothing but momentum and rage. Then Nyla's safety line caught. Hana's didn't. Nyla slammed into the side of the building, ribs cracking, breath exploding from her lungs. Above her, she heard Kwon screaming her name. Below her, she heard nothing at all. She hung there, spinning slowly, and every nerve in her body reported damage. Cracked ribs, dislocated shoulder. The bullet wound in her leg had torn open, painting her jeans dark and wet. But she was alive. And more importantly, Min Seo. Kwon's voice ragged with relief. The girl was alive. Nyla closed her eyes and let herself spin in the wind, 40 stories above a city that had no idea how close it had come to another tragedy. Her sat phone buzzed against her chest. She ignored it. Whatever it was could wait. It took Kwon and building security 20 minutes to haul her back up. By the time they did, the 2 shooters were zip-tied and unconscious. Min Seo was wrapped in Kwon's jacket, and the white wolf looked like he'd aged a decade. You're insane, he said, hands shaking as he checked her pulse. That was insane. Math worked, Nyla managed through gritted teeth. Mostly. Mostly? He laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. You jumped off a building. I had a rope. You had a theory. But his hands were gentle as he stabilized her shoulder, and his eyes were wet. Thank you. For my niece. For... His voice cracked. Thank you. Nyla wanted to say something profound. Something that would make sense of the violence. The sacrifice. The fact that she'd just killed someone to save a child she'd never met. But all that came out was, get me off this roof before I pass out. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and morphine. Nyla drifted in and out, catching fragments Kwon on the phone, his voice cold and surgical as he mobilized his remaining people. Minseo crying softly, asking for her mother. The paramedic saying something about internal bleeding. At the hospital, they tried to separate her from Kwon. He made one phone call, and suddenly she had a private room, a trauma surgeon, and enough security to guard a head of state. She woke to white walls and the smell of antiseptic. Kwon sat in the chair beside her bed, still in his blood-stained shirt, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Minseo? Nyla's voice was sandpaper. Safe. With her mother. Traumatized but alive. He leaned forward. The shooters talked. Lucio Andrade orchestrated everything: the hit at the glass koi, the arson, the ambush. Hana was feeding him intel for 18 months. He promised her revenge. Instead, he used her. And now? Kwon's eyes went dark. Now I'm going to end him. His operation. His empire. Everything. He stood, and she saw the white wolf fully unleashed for the first time. No polish, no pretense, just predatory focus. I'm going to burn his world down until there's nothing left but ash and regret. Kwon. He took my people, burned my restaurant, kidnapped my niece. There's no negotiation here, no mercy, just math. His voice was ice. And the equation ends with him in the ground. Nyla tried to sit up, gasped, as pain lanced through her ribs. If you do this, if you go full scorched earth, you become exactly what they've been saying you are. The monster, the gangster, the white wolf who never stopped killing. Maybe that's what I've always been. No. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. You're the man who spent 10 years building something legitimate, who turned violence into sense, opportunity, who just held his niece and cried, her eyes locked with his. Don't let them take that from you. Don't let Andrade win by turning you into him. Then what do you suggest? His voice was raw. I let him walk? Pretend this didn't happen? I suggest we be smarter. Nyla's mind was already working, even through the morphine haze. You want him destroyed? Fine. But we do it with evidence, not bullets. We feed the feds everything: his roots, his financials, his network. We let the system eat him alive while you keep your hands clean. That could take months, or it could take 3 weeks if we do it right. She smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. I know people. Agencies that owe me favors I've never collected. Give me access to Andrade's operation, and I'll hand you a gift-wrapped RICO case that puts him away for life. Kwon stared at her. You'd do that? Risk exposure to help me? I'm already exposed. The moment I moved at the glass koi, I stopped being invisible. She exhaled slowly. Might as well make it count. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you need? Time, access, and a promise. What promise? That when this is over, you let me disappear. No questions, no tracking, no favors owed. Her voice softened. I've been running for 3 years. I'm tired, and I need to know that helping you won't be the thing that finally gets me killed. Kwon nodded slowly. You have my word. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like goodbye. Her sat phone buzzed again. This time she couldn't ignore it. She pulled it from her jacket, somehow still intact despite everything, and looked at the screen. Her blood turned to ice. Contract reactivated. Return to service within 72 hours or be rendered non-negotiable. Below it, a photo. Nyla, taken yesterday, walking into Kwon's building. They'd found her. The program that had made her, trained her, and supposedly let her go, had been watching the whole time. Kwon saw her face. What is it? She turned the phone toward him, and watched understanding dawn in his eyes. They want you back. They want me dead if I don't comply. Her hands were shaking. I thought I had more time. I thought... Her voice broke. I'm sorry. I can't help you with Andrade. I have to run. Now. Tonight. No. Kwon's voice was steel. You're not running alone. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. He took her hand. You saved my niece. You saved me. And I don't abandon people who bleed for my family. His eyes were fierce. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to finish Andrade. Together. And then we're both going to disappear. You from your program, me from this city. And we're going to do it in a way that makes us ghosts even ghosts can't find. Nyla stared at him. You'd give up everything? Your empire? Your life here? Power never made me safe, Kwon said quietly. You make me dangerous in the right direction. That's worth more than any empire. Outside, dawn was breaking over Los Angeles. Inside the hospital room, two people who'd spent years running from their pasts made a choice to run toward something else entirely. Something that looked almost like hope. The textile fortress sat on the edge of the industrial district like a monument to legitimate crime. 3 stories of converted warehouse space, where Lucio Andrade ran a fashion import business that laundered more money than it ever made. The building had security cameras, armed guards, and enough legal protection to survive a Senate investigation. Kwon arrived with what remained of his organization, 12 men, 3 vehicles, and enough firepower to start a small war. They staged 2 blocks away, engines idling, waiting for the order that would turn the night into a graveyard. Nyla watched from the passenger seat, her ribs taped, her shoulder immobilized, her legs screaming with every heartbeat. She'd checked herself out of the hospital against medical advice 6 hours ago. The doctors said she needed weeks of recovery. She had 72 hours before her old program came hunting. Last chance to do this the clean way, she said quietly. Kwon's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His eyes were fixed on the building where the man who'd burned his restaurant, killed his people, and terrorized his family was probably sleeping soundly. He doesn't deserve clean. No. He deserves prison. He deserves to lose everything slowly, publicly, while the world watches. She turned to face him. You burn that building. You become the story. Mafia boss wages war in Los Angeles. Every camera, every headline, every prosecutor in the state comes for you. And everything you've built, the legitimacy, the empire, the future, it all turns to ash with him. Then what was the point? Kwon's voice was raw. What was the point of Min Seo on that rooftop? Of Hana's betrayal? Of 6 good men dying in a kill box? If I don't end this, what message does that send? That you're smarter than they are. That you won. Nyla pulled out her phone and opened an encrypted folder. 3 weeks ago, when you first offered me protection, I started building an insurance policy. I tracked Andrade's supply chain, his financial networks, his communications. Every dirty dollar, every illegal shipment, every bribe and threat. She handed him the phone. I dead-dropped it all to HSI and the KNP task force yesterday. Encrypted, anonymized, untraceable to you. Kwon stared at the screen, scrolling through evidence that would take years to compile: bank records, shipping manifests, surveillance photos, recorded conversations. How did you... I told you. I used to be a ghost. I know how to haunt people. She took the phone back. Right now, federal agents are getting warrants. By dawn, they'll have enough to freeze his assets, seize his properties, and indict everyone in his organization from the top down. He'll spend the rest of his life in a cage, and you'll never have to fire a shot. And if he runs, he won't get the chance. Nyla pointed at the building. Look. Kwon looked. At first, he saw nothing. Then movement. Vehicles approaching from 3 directions. No lights, moving with tactical precision. Black SUVs. Unmarked vans. The kind of convoy that only meant one thing. Federal raid, Nyla said softly. HSI, DEA, probably ATF for good measure. They've been watching him for months, waiting for enough evidence to make it stick. I just gave them everything they needed wrapped in a bow. They watched in silence as the convoy surrounded the building. Floodlights erupted. Loudspeakers barked commands in English and Spanish. Armed agents poured out like a flood. And within minutes, the textile fortress was breached. Kwon's radio crackled. One of his men. Boss, what do we do? He looked at Nyla. She looked back, and in her eyes, he saw the question that mattered. What kind of man do you want to be? He picked up the radio. Stand down. All units, stand down and withdraw. It's over. Boss, it's over. His voice carried the weight of a decade of violence finally being set down. Go home. Be with your families. The war ends tonight. One by one, his vehicles pulled away, disappearing into the Los Angeles night like they'd never been there at all. Kwon and Nyla stayed, watching from a distance as Lucio Andrade was dragged out in handcuffs, his empire collapsing in real time under the weight of federal warrants and frozen accounts. He looked smaller than his reputation, just a man in expensive pajamas, screaming about lawyers and rights while the world stopped listening. "You gave me a gift," Kwon said quietly. "A way to win without becoming a monster." "You gave yourself that gift," Nyla corrected. "I just showed you where it was." He turned to her, and his eyes were wet. "What happens now? Now you go see your niece. You rebuild. You prove that the White Wolf can be more than teeth and blood." She smiled, and it was almost genuine. "You get to be human again. And you?" Nyla's sat phone sat heavy in her pocket, counting down the hours until her past came to collect. "I run. Like I always do. Not alone." Kwon's voice was firm. "I meant what I said. We disappear together. New names, new lives, somewhere they'll never think to look." "You'd really walk away from all of this?" "I've spent 10 years building an empire that almost got my niece killed. That cost me 6 good men and a woman I trusted like family." He looked at the city sprawling around them, beautiful and indifferent and utterly exhausting. "Maybe it's time to build something smaller, something that doesn't require blood to maintain." Nyla wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being foolish, that running never worked, that the past always caught up eventually. But looking at him, at the exhaustion in his eyes and the hope trying to survive beneath it, she couldn't bring herself to kill that hope with truth. 72 hours, she said instead. "That's how long we have before my program comes hunting. If we're going to disappear, we need to move fast and smart. I know people, forgers, fixers, the kind who can make us vanish so completely even governments lose the trail." He started the engine. "But first, there's something I need to do." Minseo was asleep when they arrived at Kwon's sister's house, a modest home in Glendale, far from the empire and the violence. His sister, Ji-won, opened the door with eyes that were equal parts grateful and furious. "You almost got her killed," she said, voice shaking. "I know," Kwon's voice broke. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Ji-won stared at him for a long moment, then pulled him into a fierce embrace. "She's alive because of you. Because of her." She nodded at Nyla. "Thank you, both of you." They sat in the living room, drinking tea that tasted like forgiveness, and watched Minseo sleep on the couch, small and safe, and utterly unaware of how close she'd come to never waking up. "I'm leaving," Kwon said quietly. "The business, the city, all of it. I'm going somewhere they can't find me, and I'm never coming back." Ji-won nodded slowly. "Good. You've been dying here for years. Maybe wherever you're going, you can finally live." He kissed his sister's forehead. He kissed his niece's hair, and then he walked out of that house and didn't look back, because looking back would have broken him. They drove through the night, heading east toward a horizon that was either freedom or a smarter cage. Nyla's sat phone buzzed one final time. She looked at the message, 48 hours remaining, and threw the phone out the window. It shattered on the highway behind them, taking her old name with it. "No going back now," Kwon said. "There never was." Nyla leaned her head against the window, watching Los Angeles disappear in the rearview mirror. "Just forward. Always forward. Where do we go?" "Somewhere small. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one thinks to look for a Korean Mafia boss and a burned Black Ops operative." She smiled. "I hear Montana's nice this time of year." Kwon laughed, actually laughed, and it was the first genuine sound of joy she'd heard from him. "Montana? From the glass koi to cattle ranches. You'll learn, will I?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the White Wolf or the Forbes visionary, but just a man who'd finally chosen to stop running toward power and start running toward something that might actually matter. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think you will." The sun rose over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, Los Angeles woke to news of Lucio Andrade's arrest, federal raids, and the mysterious disappearance of Seung-hyun Kwon. The headlines would speculate for weeks. The authorities would investigate for months. But they'd never find the truth. Because the truth was driving east in a stolen car with fake plates, too. Ghosts who'd finally stopped haunting their pasts and started building a future. It wouldn't be easy. The program would keep looking. Andrade's allies would want revenge. And somewhere in the world, there were people who remembered the White Wolf and the operative called Osprey, and wouldn't rest until both were buried. But for now, for this moment, with the road stretching endlessly ahead and the weight of their old lives finally lifting, they were free. Or at least, they were free enough. And sometimes, that's all anyone can ask for. The diner sat on the edge of a Montana highway, the kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee, and locals knew everyone's name. Nyla now called Sarah, poured refills, and smiled at customers who never looked twice. Kwon now called James, worked the kitchen, learning to flip eggs instead of empires. It was small. It was quiet. It was nothing like the life either of them had known. It was perfect. Until the day a man in a dark suit walked in, sat at the counter, and ordered black coffee. He didn't look at the menu, didn't make small talk, just waited until Nyla brought his cup, then slid a photograph across the counter. It was her, from 3 years ago, in tactical gear, standing over a body in a country that officially didn't exist. "Osprey," the man said quietly. "It's time to come home." Nyla's hand didn't shake as she picked up the photo. Didn't shake as she looked at Kwon through the kitchen window. Didn't shake as she made the choice she'd known was coming since the moment they'd run. "No," she said simply. The man smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. That wasn't a request. "I don't care." She set down the coffee pot. "I'm done. Find someone else. There is no one else. And if you don't come willingly..." He glanced toward the kitchen, toward Kwon. "Well, we both know how this ends." Nyla felt the old instincts rising, the calculations, the threat assessments, the muscle memory that knew a dozen ways to kill a man before he could draw breath to scream. But beneath that, something newer, something that looked almost like hope. She leaned close, voice dropping to a whisper. "You tell them I'm dead. You tell them Osprey died on a rooftop in Los Angeles. And if anyone comes looking, if anyone even thinks about looking, I'll burn your entire program to the ground and salt the earth it stood on. Are we clear?" The man stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. A real smile this time. Crystal. He stood, left a $20 bill on the counter, and walked out. Nyla watched him drive away, and only when his car disappeared over the horizon did she finally exhale. Kwon emerged from the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, eyes questioning. "Old friend?" he asked. "Old ghost," she corrected. "But he's gone now. For good? For now." She took his hand. "That's all we ever get. Now. This moment. This choice." He squeezed her hand, and in his eyes, she saw the same truth she felt. That they were still running, still hunted, still one step ahead of pasts that refused to stay buried. But they were running together, and that made all the difference.